Hi everybody, welcome back to the In All Things Give Thanks Pillow Along. We are in week 2. Today we're going to make our 2 maple leaf blocks, the pumpkin block, wreath block, and the house block. Let's go over what we're going to need today. Some of our fabrics have the fusible backing. That's noted in the instructions. I'll try to remember to show that for each of the blocks. Your light mesh cutaway stabilizer. And for the door on the house, if you're using the embroidery leather, you want to grab your wash away topping. We'll also be using wash away stabilizer for the pumpkin flowers for our pumpkin block. Last week I showed all my fabrics. I've got everything prepped and in bags. I'll show everything really quick. We've got our maple leaf 1, our maple leaf 2, and for these 2 blocks, I'm going to put both of these in one hoop. I have a piece of scrap batting in there, so I don't have a measurement for you for the batting. Pumpkin block, if you haven't cut your batting 5.5 by 7.5. The wreath block, cut your batting 7.5 inches square. And for the house block, your batting needs to be 5.5 by 7.5. I've picked my thread colors. I'll go through all of these with you. I like to keep them in my fabric wrapped rope bowl. This has a Kimberbell applique base. I have an instructional video how to make this. I'll link that below. I went through my fabrics and I matched up colors. A couple of the colors I didn't pull. I did not pull for light brown yet. I may use the same for tan and light brown, and the same in the case of red. I may use the burgundy instead of pulling a separate color for red. I'm going to show you all the thread colors. I'm using Floriani. Apologies for so much overdubbing. There were some audio issues. I've got black, dark brown, medium brown, light brown, and this may also end up being used for tan. I have 2 oranges, a dark orange and a light orange, burgundy, green, and my green is a darker green because this goes with my fabrics, and yellow. If you're using the same fabrics and thread, you can grab a quick screenshot of that. I'm using fabrics from Lori Holt's Autumn line. I have a regular 7511 Schmetz embroidery needle on my machine. I'm going to be using that for this project. We're going to start with our 2 maple leaf blocks. They both fit in a 5x7 hoop. I'll show you how to do that. And just a quick reminder, any of the products information, everything is linked below. For Kimberbell products, I am an affiliate, and if you use my link, it has my affiliate code on it. I receive a very small commission from that. Everything you see in this series of videos was purchased by me. Load your stabilizer, hand tighten, screwdriver tighten. Let's get over to the machine and start our maple leaf blocks. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. All my files are on USB. If you have a Baby Lock or Brother, all of your screens will look either the same or extremely similar to my screen. You'll have the same type of buttons. In All Things Give Thanks. Before we load the embroidery block, I need to load the background quilting. And this block is done a little bit differently, so it is going to affect how I load the blocks. We're going to use the KDQ 240 Thanksgiving 2 2x2 for the first block. And you want to select the block by block. Your little turkey right there, 2x2. Hit the set button. I'm going to move them up just a little bit. And we're going to add the background quilting for the next block. Maple Leaf 2 uses the other background quilting that's in this bundle, the KDQ 239 Autumn 5 2x2 horizontal design. This one right here. I'm going to put some space between these two. I'm also checking up here at the top of my screen. I can see all my hoops are lit up except for the smallest hoop, which is 4x4. So I'm good with the arrangement here. I'll be able to fit these both in the 5x7. One thing that's interesting about these blocks is we're going to go through part of the background quilting and then do the applique and then go back and finish, and you'll see why. Let's add our maple leaf on top. Sorry for any dog barking. We have 3 rescue dogs and a whole host of animals here at the house. Let's pull up the In All Things Give Thanks. We're going to pull up our maple leaf. I'm going to hit set. And you can see it's not quite where I want it to be. You can drag and drop your maple leaf. Let's say you're having trouble getting it to line up. Hit the edit button. Hit move. Use the little arrows. Too far. When you get it lined up correctly, you can see it looks like I've only got one outline. That's all centered. I'm going to hit OK. There's a couple ways to duplicate your blocks. There's the duplicate key and the border duplicate key. Usually I like to use the border duplicate key because what it will do is work on both of the blocks at the same time. So it'll do something here and then something here, and then it'll do the next step and the next step. But with these maple leaf blocks, maple leaf 1 has the detail in the dark brown and maple leaf 2 has the detail in the dark orange, or whatever thread colors you want to use. So I don't want to use that border duplicate key because it won't stop as it moves between the blocks. You can use the regular duplicate key, or you can add another block. Let's just use the regular duplicate key. Grab it, slide it down. I'm going to get my move arrows, make sure I've got that lined up just right. We're all set. I'm going to hit the memory button. Save it to my machine, just in case I get interrupted or something happens, and we're ready to start. We've got 2 blocks with 2 different sets of background quilting. We have a batting placement, a batting tack down, a fabric placement, a fabric tack down, and then the quilting. That's for the one on top, and then it runs through the one on the bottom. However, this block is done a little bit differently. It's in the instructions right here. We're on page 12. It talks about placing the batting and the background fabric. Don't stitch the quilting, because if we stitch the quilting, it's going to get covered up by our maple leaf fabric. So we're going to go through part of the background quilting, skip over it, do the maple leaf applique, and then at the very end, go back and do the quilting. If you've never had to advance or go backwards in your design, we'll step through it slowly with this block. Let's go ahead and start stitching out our blocks. I have a generic neutral beige thread on my machine. The first thing that's going to stitch out is the batting placement line for the top block for maple leaf 1. My placement line has stitched. I want to grab my scrap batting. I want to make sure I cover that placement line, and then I'm going to stitch the tack down. I need to trim away everything that's outside of the tack down line. Once that's trimmed, you're going to stitch your fabric placement line. I have my maple leaf 1 fabric. I need to cover that placement line. I'm also going to keep in mind that I've got another block here, so I don't want to cover it like this because this will end up being in the way and I'll have to trim it out of the way. I'm going to slide it more toward the top. Let's stitch the tack down. The tack down line has stitched. We need to stop and go over to our screen. You can see the next thing on the screen is the little turkey. That's the quilting. We want to skip that. We're going to go back and do that at the end. You should have a needle minus plus or needle plus minus. Go ahead and touch that. The double arrows going down will go forward, going up will go backwards. They're going to advance it by the spool. I just skipped my background quilting. Now I'm ready to do the batting and fabric for maple leaf 2 like we just did with maple leaf 1. We're going to go through the same steps on this. I'll go ahead and set that all to music. My maple leaf 2 background fabric is tacked down. We need to advance our design. You can see the quilting design. We'll come back to that. Needle minus plus. Going to advance by 1. You'll see after you advance from the quilting, it moved up to the first one, and I've got a square. This is set up to use the maple leaf whether or not you're using background quilting. So this first square is a fabric placement line. We already did that with our background fabric. You can go through that. That's your fabric tack down line. If you stitch them out, it doesn't matter. It's just going to go around on your background fabric. We want to start here at the stem. For maple leaf block 1, I'm going to switch to my dark brown thread, and we're going to stitch out that stem, and after we stitch out the stem, we actually work on the maple leaf applique. My dark brown thread is on the machine. I'm going to stitch out the stem for maple leaf 1. Next, we're going to stitch out the fabric placement line for our leaf fabric. Your maple leaf 1 fabric, cover that placement line, and then you'll stitch the tack down. I need to trim everything that's outside of the tack down line. I've got that all trimmed. I'm going to stitch the leaf decorative outline. Leaf 1 is done. You can see my machine advanced to leaf number 2, which is fine. We'll go back and we'll get the background quilting later. I need to do the same thing for leaf number 2. I don't need that fabric placement and tack down. That's fabric placement, fabric tack down. That's what I want to see, the stem for the leaf. My fabrics are different. I have a red up there and a brown, and then the fabric that's going to go on top for the leaf is dark red. I'm going to use my burgundy thread. If you're using an orange fabric, it looks like the original may have been done in a dark orange fabric. The called for thread is the dark orange, but that will look weird with what I'm working with right now. So I'm going to use the burgundy. We're going to go through the exact same steps. I'll go ahead and set this to music, and then I'll show you how to get back to do your background quilting. The decorative outline for Maple Leaf 2 has stitched out. You'll see on my screen it says finished embroidering. We're back at the beginning. All we need to do now is to advance to do the background quilting. Per the instructions, the background quilting for block 1 is dark orange, and for block 2 it's dark brown. I'm actually going to use the color that I pulled for either light brown or tan, and use this for the quilting on both of my blocks. Same thing we've been doing, needle minus plus. I need to go forward until I see my little turkey. This is now ready to stitch. The turkey stitched out, we need to advance our design and get to the next quilting design with the acorns. Ready to go. I'm using the same thread. If you're switching threads, switch your thread color. Here's Maple Leaf Block 1. I'm so glad I picked the light color thread. See that? I can actually see the turkey. Here's Maple Leaf Block 2. I can see the little acorn and the leaves, the little swirls. These came out great. We're going to set these aside. We'll do all of our trimming at the end. We're going to move on to the pumpkin block. We're going to work on the pumpkin block. A quick note, this is the color it shows for the thread. That's not in the color key. I think they intend to use tan. I'm going to actually use the tan light brown that I just finished using on my maple leaf. Look at your background fabric, see what looks good, pick a color. That's the color key really quick. You can see they gave something that looks like the color black, but it looks like the color tan. I think they just mixed up their symbols. Let's load our file. We need to load the background quilting first. KDQ 239 Autumn 5 4x6 vertical. Here's my 4x6 designs, horizontal, vertical, because this block in our hoop actually is going to look sideways. So I'm going to have a pumpkin here and a pumpkin here with the stems pointing that way. I want that file. And now we want to add our pumpkins. Here they are. Going to hit set. We're good to go. Hit embroidery. For this block, we're going to follow the normal order of background quilting. We'll step through this together. We're going to stitch out our batting placement line. Take your batting, cover the placement line. Look for any dark threads. Make sure you don't have anything that's going to be seen through your background fabric. I'm going to stitch the batting tack down and then trim everything that's outside the line. Stitch your fabric placement line. Take a moment if you've got a directional fabric to make sure you have it placed right. Once you have it placed, we'll stitch the fabric tack down line. My fabric is tacked down. We're going to go ahead and stitch our background quilting. The background quilting is done. We're going to start stitching our embroidery and applique. We want to switch to our dark brown. We're going to stitch out the flower stem detail. Switch to light orange and we're going to stitch out the flower 1 fill. Switch to green, we're going to stitch the pumpkin stem and flower 2. The next thing we're going to stitch is the placement line for our pumpkin fabric. It has us doing that in a neutral color and then switching to the dark orange for the tack down and for the detail. I'm going to go ahead and put my dark orange right now for the placement line. It'll be fine. There's orange fabric going over it and we're going to have detail in this color thread. I'm going to save myself a step. Grab your large pumpkin fabric, cover that placement line. I am going to add a piece of tape to that. I want to make sure that that stays and doesn't slide. Make sure it's covered. Then we're going to stitch the tack down line. That actually stitched tack down and a bit of the detail. A little bit different. You want to trim everything that's outside of the tack down line. Once you have it trimmed, we'll stitch the satin outline. The next step is going to be the small pumpkin placement line, then the tack down and detail and satin stitching just like we did. My small pumpkin fabric is this dark red. It has us leaving the dark orange on the machine. I don't think that's going to look good. I'm actually going to switch to my burgundy color. I've got my burgundy thread. These are the same steps. We're going to do the placement, tack down and detail, trim, and then do the nice outline. That's all stitched out. I'm going to switch to tan and we're going to stitch the flower center fills. You'll notice on your machine there's a little line here and a little line here. Don't stitch those. It says they're design placement lines. This is done. We can take this off our machine. Our pumpkins are stitched. Do you see how we have a few stems with nothing on them? We need to stitch out the pumpkin flowers. For that, we're going to need the wash away embroidery stabilizer and our felt. I'm going to work with my 5x7 hoop. It does say in the instructions 4x4 hoop. If you've got the tiny hoop, go ahead and use that. This is the smallest hoop I have for my machine. I want to go ahead and load some of this wash away stabilizer. The pumpkin flowers use felt. If you don't have felt, you can use fabric. It'll look just as nice. You could also use buttons if you have some little floral buttons or even regular buttons. And you can sew some buttons on in its place, make it a little bit different. The instructions for these are on page 35. One thing it has you do as you're working through the instructions is changing your bobbin thread to match your top thread. I'm not going to do that. My top thread is a 30 weight. My machine likes 90 weight bobbin thread. I don't like to mess with that. What does that mean? We might end up seeing some of my bobbin thread in the final product. You can look at it and decide what you prefer, but I will not be changing my bobbin thread to match. Let's bring up our pumpkin flowers. You can see it says 4x4. And it will fit in a 4x4 hoop. See, the little tiny hoop is lit up, but I'm using a 5x7. That's all I have. We're ready to go. We're going to start with the flower one placement line. It says to use a neutral thread. I've got my tan color on. Neutral enough. I'm going to use that. Grab your burgundy felt. We want to cover that placement line, and then we're going to stitch the tack down, and it says do not trim at this time. Cover. Let's stitch the tack down. Going to switch to my burgundy thread. It does say in the instructions change your bobbin thread to match the top thread. I'm not going to do that. I changed my thread. We're going to stitch the flower one outline and petal details. When I hold the light orange up to this, I do not like the way that looks. I don't think that looks very good at all. I'm actually going to switch back to the tan and use that for the center fill on my flower. The center fill has stitched. I need to trim away the extra felt. I trimmed all the way around. You actually only need to trim the bottom because it gets in the way of the next stitch out. But if you trim all the way around, that's fine too. Put a neutral thread on your machine. We're going to stitch the flower to felt placement line. So we're going to have another little box stitch out down here. Place your flower to felt, covering that line, and then stitch the tack down. Going to change to my green thread. If you want your bobbin thread to match, you need to match with your green thread. Going to stitch the flower to outline and petal details. That's all stitched out. I'm going to change to tan. If you're changing your bobbin threads, the bobbin thread changes with every step to match. The center flower fill has stitched. I need to take off my tape and I need to trim off this piece of felt. Put a neutral thread on your machine, watch your bobbin thread. We're going to stitch the next placement line. Place your flower 3 felt and stitch the tack down. Taking my tape off. This is in the color tan. We're going to stitch the petals and the outline details. I'm going to change my thread to green. We're going to stitch that center fill. If you're changing your bobbin threads, change out your bobbin thread to match. These are all stitched out. I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. We'll trim these and talk about getting rid of the water-soluble stabilizer at the end when we trim all of our blocks. We're on the wreath block, and again, they've got this color up here in the corner for the quilting. I think it's supposed to be tan, so I already have that thread on my machine. We're going to start with the neutral thread anyway, and that fits the bill. We need KDQ 240 Thanksgiving 2 6x6 design. That's right here. It's really cute. It's got the little turkeys and some words on it. It says give thanks. I'm going to set that. We're going to add our wreath block on top of that. I'm ready to go. Oh, it's telling me to change to a larger embroidery frame. I put an 8x8 on my machine. Let's see if it'll take that. Thumbs up. When you look at this block, if we were just doing the wreath, you could use a 5x7 hoop. What made this too big for that hoop was that background quilting, that 6x6. Honestly, a light bulb should have gone off in my head. 5x7, 6x6. You know it's not going to fit. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm using my 8x8 hoop. We're going to start with our background quilting. So we'll have our batting placement, batting tack down, trim, fabric placement, fabric tack down, and then do the quilting. I'll go ahead and set all of that to music. Background quilting is all done. The next step are the words, the in all things give thanks, and the detail that's going around the wreath. It has this in dark brown. I'm actually going to stitch mine in the nice dark green. I think that'll look really pretty, and it's going to make it pop a little bit more off my neutral background fabric. That's all stitched out. Looks great in the green. I like it. One thing that I did notice, the first thing that's stitched was the outside detail. Now, it all did stitch continuously, but it would be easy enough to watch and stop your machine after it stitched the wreath. Let's say you wanted to stitch the wreath in brown and you want the text in another color. Easy enough to do that and manually change your thread between. Switching to my yellow thread, we're going to stitch the placement lines for our leaves 1, 3, and 7. Placement lines of stitch. There's one right here up top. You want to make sure your felt completely covers that line, or fabric if you're using fabric, whatever you're using. I've got another one right here. This leaf ends over here, so it's okay for me to place this like that and having that cover it. Nothing is going to get stitched between the two leaves. And this one goes this way. Make sure it's covered. Push that tape down, and we're going to stitch the tack down. You want to take your tape off, trim everything that's outside the lines, and then stitch the decorative outline. If you've got a pair of snips like this, I'm going to highly recommend that for trimming these. These have some tight spots. Decorative outline is done. The leaves look great. Switch to green, and we're going to go through the same steps for the green leaves. We've got one piece that's cut like a rectangle. That's going to be these two leaves here at the bottom. They're leaves 5 and 6. The green leaves are done. It has switching to the light orange thread. Let's have a look at that. Sorry about the barking. Here's my light orange. It does definitely show up much brighter on camera. When I place that next to this color of felt, this felt is more brown than orange. I really don't like the way the orange looks next to that felt. I have this color that I pulled for medium brown. Now, it's not a match, but I feel like this looks better next to this color felt than the bright orange. I actually took this felt to my thread wall, held it up in front of all the colors of Floriani that I have. I have a few colors of Glide, and then I have some Sim thread and new Bro thread. Nothing matches this felt. I've got that medium brown on my machine, light orange if you're following the instructions. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to have a placement line, place the felt, trim it, and do the decorative outline. I'll do all of that to music. The brown leaves are all stitched out. That looks so much better than the orange would have looked. We're going to switch to tan, and we're going to work on the acorns. There's 5 acorns, and the beginning steps are all the same. I'll go ahead and set that to music. The acorns are almost done. We want to switch to dark brown, and we're going to stitch the cap on the acorns, and it looks like we've got a couple leaves where it's going to stitch out a detail, like the vein running through the center of the leaf. That will be the last thing to stitch out for this block. This block is done. The only thing I think I would do different if I stitch this again with this same background fabric is maybe do the medium brown around the outside of the acorn. The tan color kind of blends in a little bit to my background fabric. Let's load the house block. The house block is also done a little bit differently. We are going to start by loading the quilting KDQ 239 Autumn 5 4x6. 4x6 horizontal. So the one that goes this way because the house is going to go up and down. Go ahead and hit set and then add the house file and hit embroidery. What's different about this block is we have two background fabrics. We've got the background 1, which is the light color, and the background 2, which is the green. So we're going to start with our batting placement, batting tack down, fabric placement, fabric tack down, but don't quilt then because we have to place the background 2 fabric. Let's work through this one together. I have my tan colored thread on the embroidery machine since I'll be using that for the background quilting. I'm going to stitch my batting placement, my batting tack down, and trim my batting. We've done all that before. The batting is tacked down and trimmed. We're going to stitch out our fabric placement line. Go ahead and place your background fabric to cover that placement line. I'm wondering if I cut mine a little bit big. It does look like I have quite a bit there. That's all covered. We're going to stitch the tack down. This is tacked down. Let's go over to our screen. You can see the next thing it wants to stitch is the quilting. We need to skip that for now. Needle minus plus, just like before. Let's skip over the quilting. This line here is the background 1 placement line. We've already placed our background 1 fabric. You would start here if you're not doing the background quilting. We can skip that. This is the line that we need. This is the background 2 placement line. I want to hit OK, and we're going to stitch that out. We're going to stitch out that background 2 placement line. Here's that stitch line right there. Grab your background 2 fabric, right side down. We want to place this part of the fabric right along that line we just stitched. So center it along that line, just like that. So your top fabric here, your background 2, is right side down. Then we're going to stitch a seam. Our seam has stitched. We want to flip this and press it. This is not on the bed of my machine. I can feel it's kind of pushing into loose stabilizer. I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to slide it over, just so I've got a nice solid surface underneath. Finger press. You can take this to your ironing board if you want. This is a clover seam roller. Just going to roll over it. I don't want to take it to my iron. I don't have the iron plugged in, and this will be good enough. We're going to put quilting on top of that. Going to put this back on my machine, and then it's going to stitch a background tack down line. It's going to go all the way around, so keep an eye on it. We now have both of our background fabrics placed and tacked down. We have to back up and stitch our quilting. You can see on the screen we've got the chimney. We're going to go back up until we see our background quilting. We're ready to go. I'm going to stitch my background quilting in the tan color. You can change your thread if you need to. Our quilting is stitched. Let's go back to our screen. We need to go forward to the point where we see that chimney. We're going to use the arrows going down. We are ready to go. Switch to your dark brown thread and we'll stitch out the chimney. There went the chimney. Sorry, I forgot to hit the button for that. Here's our little chimney. Looks like little bricks. The next thing we're going to stitch is the house placement line for our house fabric. My house fabric is this red with the dots. You can use a neutral thread if you're using a color similar to the colors in the instructions. We're going to do a placement tack down and then a satin outline with the burgundy. When I put the burgundy next to this, the burgundy looks a little dark. I hadn't pulled a color for red. I'm going to incorporate this red. This red matches this fabric really well. Let me show you the color number for that. Here's the color number. I'm going to use this for red. I'm going to go ahead and put this on my machine because we're going to do a placement, a tack down, trim, and then there's going to be a satin stitch that goes all the way around this. So this color will be just fine. I've got my red on the machine. I'm going to stitch out the placement line, place my fabric, and stitch the tack down. Take your tape off and then trim everything that's outside the line. Once you've got the fabric trimmed, put this back on the machine and you'll stitch the satin outline. Next, we're going to stitch the window fabric placement line. It does say to stitch this in a neutral thread, but we're going to do the placement line, place the window fabric, tack it down, trim it, and then we're going to put the satin stitch on the outside in burgundy, or in my case, red. I'm going to leave my red thread on the machine rather than switch back and forth. The red looks really good on that fabric. I think that looks much better than the burgundy. The next thing we're going to do is stitch out our roof placement line. This is my roof fabric. It says to stitch out the placement line in the light brown. I pulled one color for light brown and tan. That's this color. It's going to blend into my background, so I'm going to use the color that I pulled for medium brown instead. The roof is done. We're going to start on the door. It says to switch to your medium brown. That's already on my machine. We're going to stitch the door placement line. In the instructions, you're using the embroidery leather for this. I don't have embroidery leather. I'm going to use felt, but I'm going to walk through the steps as if I was using the embroidery leather. So pretend that's embroidery leather, which, by the way, is not leather. It's a PVC product. It's plastic, so no animals are harmed with the embroidery leather. You'd want to place your embroidery leather, or in my case felt. If you're using fabric, you can also do this with fabric. Make sure you've covered that placement line. I'm going to go ahead and tape it. You want to grab your Kimberbell wash away topping. If you don't have any and you're using the leather, you can still stitch on the leather, but what this does is it helps your thread from sinking into the leather, and also on the back of the embroidery leather there's kind of a smooth feeling backing. Sometimes when you stitch on the embroidery leather without the wash away topping, that can pop up and it'll make your stitches look outlined. It doesn't necessarily look bad, but to avoid that, grab your wash away topping. I've cut myself a little piece. It's kind of like saran wrap if you've never used it before. I want to completely cover my felt. If you've got the embroidery leather, you want to completely cover that piece of leather. Tape it down to keep it secure. You can smooth it, but if it has some wrinkles, it's okay because it washes away. I often find that I don't get it to lie completely flat, but don't worry about it because we're going to wash it away at the end. Let's get your tape all the way around that. I'm going to slide this back on my machine. We're going to stitch the tack down and the door detail. That part is stitched out. When you take off your tape, the topping will probably pull off. It's really easy to pull off, see? And that's just fine. I'm going to go ahead and pull off everything that's on the outside. And we want to trim away everything outside of that tack down line. While you're trimming away the outside, you may notice that this starts to pull up. You can certainly pick it off. Tweezers make it really easy. If you don't want to have to get your project wet later, you can pick all of this off. Then you've just got the little pieces in the windows and in the center. The one thing I would say though about picking it off with tweezers, if you're using the embroidery leather, don't scratch your leather. You're probably better off getting it wet. I happened to use felt for this, so felt is fuzzy. If I scratch the felt, nobody's ever going to know. I'm going to go ahead and pick the rest of this off. All of that came off relatively easy. What's interesting is normally I don't use the wash away topping with felt, but wow, did I get nice clean stitches and no fuzzies. Something to think about if you're doing something with felt. I think the wash away definitely helped. We want to switch to yellow. or whatever color you'd like to use for the doorknob, and we're going to stitch the doorknob. This block is done. If you've used the embroidery leather and you still have some topping on that, go ahead and take your block out of the hoop. You can use a wet cotton swab like pictured here and just sort of rub it, and that'll get rid of the extra wash away topping. I'm going to get this out of the hoop and we're going to go trim all our blocks. Let's start with our maple leaf 1 and 2. The first thing I'm going to do is separate the blocks. These blocks trimmed to 2.5 inches square. You can trim right along the fabric tack down line. That's 2.5 inches. One thing with using a regular ruler trimming quilted blocks is the ruler kind of bounces a little bit. I'm going to trim one side at a time, and I'm going to trim right on that stitching line. I know it'll be straight and I know it will come out the right size. Let's measure our block, make sure I cut it right. This is an OmniGrid rotating cutting mat. I'll link that below. 2.5, 2.5. Came out just right. I'm going to set my little turkey aside and we're going to trim the next maple leaf block. You'll notice on this block there's a little line stitched right here. When it did the background quilting, it traveled. You don't have to worry about that. When we piece this into our project, that'll get taken up in the seam allowance. Let's move on to our pumpkin block. For the pumpkin block, we can use our orange pop rulers. If you've never used these before, we'll work through this one slow. You can see how they're used, and they're linked below. These are made by Kimberbell. We're going to trim this one to 4.5 by 6.5. This is the 4.5 by 6.5. They come as rectangles and squares with 3 per package. I'm putting the second one on the outside because it helps me hold this into place. You've got trimming lines on this block. I can see it right here, 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 and here. So you line those up with your orange pop ruler. I've got everything lined up. I can see the stitching there, right there, along the bottom here, and along the side. These are a little different than a regular ruler. You cut on this side. They've got notches here. Here you can see the corner notches because you start down here. So we'll get our rotary cutter ready. I'm going to put it right here, and you want to push it as far to this direction as you can because there's a little bit of room inside this notch. You want it all the way over so you're touching the edge of this frame. Keep your fingers out of the way. Go all the way to the top until it hits the inside of that top notch right there. Going to turn. If you want, you can grab something to hold the rulers in place as you're working around your block. This is a tin of those little clips. I'll link that below in case you want a tin of clips. As far over as possible. Just like that. The advantage to using these rulers is you don't get that wobble. We've got a little bulk from quilting and the applique, and you don't have to worry about it when you use these rulers. As far over this way as possible. And one more side. We're doing this one slow, and then I'll go faster for all the other blocks going forward. I always show the first one going slow. That way if it's anyone's first time using these rulers, you get a quick overview of how they work. Go ahead and take these off. And there's my block. It's cut to size. If you don't have the orange pop rulers, you just want to cut this so it measures 4.5 by 6.5. I'm going to set this aside. The In All Things Give Thanks block is going to trim to 6.5 inches squared. You can see that this one is too small. This is 4.5 inches square. So the center one is 6.5 inches, and then there's one for the larger size of 8.5 inches. I'm going to lay them both down, line up my lines, and then trim just like before. The house block is next. We're going to trim that 4.5 by 6.5. Let's work on the pumpkin flowers. The first thing I want to do is separate them all from each other. We've kind of got small, medium, and large. Let's start with the small. I think that's going to be the hardest. It tells you to trim around each set of petals 1/8 inch from the stitching. I want you to trim around the petals. I have these really sharp scissors. I have a set of Karen K Buckley scissors, small, medium, and large. This is the medium. I'm going to use these. I think the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of all the extra. I'm going to separate this. Looking at the other two, I think they're going to be easier because they're bigger. This one is really difficult because it's small. Just do the best you can. Remember, it's a pillow, it's a craft project, no big deal if it's not perfect. Here's the first two. I'm going to go ahead and cut my green and the light brown the same way, and then we'll talk about getting rid of the wash away stabilizer. These are all cut as good as I can get them cut, ready to go into a bowl of cool water. I'm going to do this the easy way. There they go. I'm just going to drop them in. You can shake them and you can rub and you'll be able to feel the stabilizer. Sometimes it feels a little sticky. These pieces are so small, it's really not that bad. Now you can tell the back from the front on mine because I didn't change my bobbin thread. That's the front, that's the back. I haven't looked at how we attach these yet. I don't think it's going to make a difference. There's one. By now the stabilizer's probably dissolved on everything because they've been sitting for a few seconds. It comes off pretty quick. I do want to get rid of these little extra threads on the back. You don't want to cut any of the knots because you don't want your threads to pull. You can get rid of the extra thread. They're all done. You can blot them. If you're in a hurry, you can set them outside if it's hot, like it is here in Arizona. If not, just leave them somewhere, let them dry. We're not going to attach these yet. I have this small piece of batting. It'll keep them from slipping and getting lost. I'm going to put them on the batting and then lay them flat to dry. It actually says shape the petals as desired, so if you want to, like, play with them or whatever, I'm just going to lay them flat to dry. You can see where the flowers are going to go. Here's the green one, here's the light colored one, and here's the red one. And it looks like when we attach them, you're going to attach the one that doesn't have the center first, and then the one with the center, you'll kind of offset them to make it look like that. If you want, as these are drying, and you want that top flower to have curved up petals, you can do that and set it like that to dry. Let's get a look at everything. We've got our maple leaf blocks, our pumpkin block, the In All Things Give Thanks block, our house block, and then we made our flowers that are going to go on our pumpkin block at the end. Let's take a quick look at what we're going to work on next week. We've got 2 star blocks, the big turkey and the little turkey. I already have everything pulled and cut. Let me show that to you. These are the turkey blocks. Here's how I organized everything. We've got a background fabric, and these do use embroidery leather, I believe, for the body. I'll be using felt again. I labeled everything and put a clip on it. This says body. You have to cut a bunch of different colors for the feathers. I've got little notes. This one says F5, F6. This one over here says F4, and I used a sticky note, but sticky doesn't really stick very well to fabric, so I used the clips. I did that for turkey 1 and turkey 2. I haven't done any of the fusible or the batting yet. Check your instructions for that, or you can wait until next week and then I'll make a note of all the measurements and what you need to put fusible on. The star blocks look interesting. We'll just call it that. I've got a bag for star block A, star block B, star block C, and star blocks D and E. And you'll see there's sticky notes, just like before, where I labeled everything. Here's star block A, A1, A3, A5, I think that's A2 and A4. I did the same thing. These are all the B's with the number next to it, C with their numbers, and D and E. Make sure to come back next week for week 3 for the star block, big turkey, and little turkey. All our blocks this week came out great. If you've got any questions or comments, please leave them below the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your embroidery friends. We'll be doing lots more Kimberbell projects, including Hoop Studio and Perfectly Pieced. Sounds like my dog is awake. I better go let her out. I'll see you next time. If you stay to the end, I have some bloopers for you. Are you ready? I actually stitched this turkey 3 times. This one twice. The first one I stitched I started stitching it just like a regular block. I did all the tack down. I stitched out the background quilting. You can probably barely see it because it's red on red. There's a little turkey here. And then I went to put the fabric on top and I thought, gee, that's kind of sad. We're covering the turkey. So then I decided to read the instructions when it told you not to do that until after you did your applique. So I've got a little hard to see turkey. I did it right this time, but I used the red thread. Do you see that? That looks terrible. Let's look at the good turkey that I did today. Much better. This does not look good. He's kind of like, I don't know, horror movie turkey. I just don't like the way that looks. And then the bottom one isn't bad, but you can barely see the dark brown quilting. That's why when I made another one today, I did the light colored quilting. Much better. So now I have a couple extra turkeys and this guy. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these. We'll save them for the end. Maybe I can come up with something. If not, because you watched to the end, you got to see the blooper. See you next week, folks.